Get out, you leech. We've been living here for 5 years without paying a dime. That's what my brother's wife screamed when I asked her to finally move out of my apartment after the breakup. My brother tried to step up and scare me, his jaw tight with fake confidence. But both of them froze when I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. My name is Elena Ward, I'm 29. And if you think you know how this ends, stay tuned. Tell me, how does family turn into strangers who live off you like parasites and still look you in the eye as if you owe them something? The apartment still smelled faintly of lavender, my mom's scent, from the day she handed me the keys. Keep it, Lena. Here's now. Start your life. I never imagined that same place would become their rent-free kingdom. When my brother and his wife lost their jobs, I opened my door. It was supposed to be temporary, just a couple of months, he'd said. But years passed, bills arrived in my name, repairs came out of my pocket, and somehow I was the intruder in my own home. Now, as they stood in my living room, her in my old college hoodie, him leaning against my couch, I laid the envelope on the table. Eviction notice, I said quietly. 30 days. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. You wouldn't dare. You owe us. Owe you what? I asked, my voice steady though my hands trembled behind the bag. Buy peace. Buy home. My brother's face flushed red. You're heartless, Lena. But as I looked at the clock on the wall, the same one Dad gave me before he died, the second hand froze for a moment, glinting in the sunlight like it agreed with me. And that's when I knew, this was just the beginning. Because the envelope in my bag wasn't the only one I'd prepared. The next one was going to end everything they thought they owned. My brother slammed the door so hard the sound rattled the picture frames. A photo of us as kids, both smiling, covered in sand at Myrtle Beach, slid crooked on the wall. It stared back at me like a ghost of who we used to be. He hadn't spoken to me for 3 days after the eviction notice. But this morning his wife texted. You'll regret this, Elena. You'll lose more than a roof. I almost laughed. Lose what? I'd already lost the last thread of family I trusted. The symbolic motif that kept catching my eye was the clock, that old brass one from Dad. It had stopped ticking the night I'd served them the papers. Now every time I passed it I thought, maybe it's waiting for closure too. I came home from work to find the hallway lights dim and the air heavy with a burnt plastic smell. When I opened the kitchen door I froze. The oven was on, a plastic tray half melted inside. Smoke curled lazily, curling around the ceiling like a warning. They'd left it like that. Deliberately. I shut everything off, windows wide open, my heart pounding. That was their way of saying they weren't leaving quietly. Later that night, while sorting mail on the counter, I found a thin white envelope with no return address. Inside was a folded note in my brother's handwriting. We deserve what's ours. You stole it first. Stole what? The words pulsed in my head as I looked around the apartment. Every object suddenly foreign. The couch, the photos, even the flicker of the streetlight outside. All of it felt watched. I didn't know yet that they had already started planning their revenge. But by the time I found out, it was too late for apologies. 2 days later I came home to find the locks changed. The door handle jiggled uselessly under my hand and my stomach dropped as I heard voices laughing inside. Her voice, sharp and nasal like nails dragging across glass. My brother had moved back into my apartment. I knocked once. Then twice. No answer. When I raised my fist to bang harder, the peephole darkened. Someone was watching. Open the door, Marcus. I shouted. This isn't a joke. Through the wood came his muffled voice. You shouldn't have pushed us, Lena. You don't understand what you're doing. My name, the one he used to say with kindness, sounded like a warning now. I stood there in the stairwell, gripping the eviction papers in my trembling hand, my throat burning. The clock motif came back again, the brass one I'd left on the mantel inside. I could picture its still hands frozen at 9:13 the minute I'd last felt peace. An old woman from the next apartment cracked open her door. Sweetheart, are you okay? I forced a smile. Just a misunderstanding. But her eyes stayed on me, pitying, wary. People always know when something's wrong, they just pretend they don't. That night, I slept in my car across the street, watching the light in my own window flicker. It was my brother's silhouette that passed by the curtains and then hers. They toasted something, champagne maybe. I could almost hear her laughter spilling down to the parking lot. In the rearview mirror, my reflection looked hollow. I whispered, you took my home. But you're not keeping my peace. The next morning I made 3 phone calls. One to a lawyer, one to the bank, and one to a quiet friend who owed me a favor. Because I wasn't just taking back my apartment. I was taking back everything they'd built on my silence. The lawyer's voice was calm but edged with disbelief. You're telling me they changed the locks on a property that's legally yours? Yes, I said, staring at the folder spread across my coffee-stained diner table. And they've been living there rent-free for 5 years. He adjusted his glasses. Then we'll start with a legal notice. Quietly. No confrontation. But the quiet part didn't last long. 2 days later I got a text from my brother. Stop trying to humiliate us in court. We'll make sure you regret this. That's when I noticed the clock motif again. The brass one in the background of a photo he'd just posted online. My clock. My living room. Caption: Family always finds its way home. The comments below made me sick. Mutual friends calling them survivors, praising their kindness, saying how heartless I'd been. She'd clearly been feeding them lies. But I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead I started gathering proof. Receipts, title papers, old messages. Anything that proved I was the one who paid the mortgage, utilities, maintenance. I even kept screenshots of every post, every message they'd written. That night, while scanning documents, I caught the faint lavender scent again. It came from the old keychain Mom had given me, a tiny brass charm shaped like a clock. The coincidence stung. She used to say, "Time reveals truth even when people don't." I whispered to the keychain, "Then reveal it, Mom. Please." At 2 a.m. my phone buzzed. A voicemail. Her voice. My brother's wife, dripping with triumph. "Hope you're enjoying your car bet, Elena. By next week the court will see you're unstable. We've got evidence too." My heart clenched. What evidence? But what she didn't realize was that I'd already found the first crack in their story. And by morning I'd use it to tear their whole lie apart. The next morning I drove to the courthouse with my evidence folder pressed tight against my chest like armor. The parking lot shimmered with heat, and my reflection in the glass door looked steadier than I felt. Inside, my lawyer flipped through the papers and gave a quiet nod. "They can't forge ownership. You have bank statements, transfer receipts, the deed in your name. They don't stand a chance." I wanted to believe him. But betrayal doesn't vanish with paperwork. It lingers, like dust on a photo you can't clean off. Later that day I went back to the building. Not inside, just the street corner. From across the road I watched my brother carry groceries up the steps, humming like he still belonged there. His wife leaned from the balcony watering my plants. That's when I noticed the symbolic motif again. The brass clock sitting on the windowsill catching the sun. Frozen at 9:13. Always 9:13. They hadn't even bothered to hide it. Then came the AI bait breaker detail. A sound so human, so small it shattered me. The faint chime of a spoon clinking inside one of my mugs. My favorite mug. Pale blue, chipped at the rim. The one Dad used for cocoa on winter nights. They were drinking from it. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted iron. That night I sat in my car drafting a message that would change everything. To everyone who's been wondering what's really happening, here's the truth. Attached were screenshots of legal documents, proof of ownership, and voice notes of their threats. By dawn the post was live. At first silence. Then the wave hit. Hundreds of comments. Old friends tagging my brother. Coworkers messaging, "Elena, I had no idea." By noon he'd deleted every account. But damage leaves traces. Screenshots, whispers, a story people now questioned. And I wasn't done yet. The final proof was still waiting inside that apartment, behind the brass clock that refused to tick. 2 nights later I went back, not with anger this time but with purpose. The sky was low and gray, the kind that hums before rain. I waited until the hallway lights flickered off at midnight. Then I slipped the master key into the lock. It turned easily. They hadn't even changed it again. Inside, the apartment smelled like stale perfume and cheap takeout. My plants were wilting and my framed art had been replaced by their wedding photos. My pulse thudded in my throat. The brass clock motif still sat on the mantel, the frozen hands gleaming in the dark. 9:13. Always 9:13. I lifted it gently, heavy, colder than I remembered, and heard something rattle inside. That's when the human detail cut through me. The faint scratch of my brother's slippers down the hall. He was home. I ducked behind the couch as the bedroom door opened. His wife's voice floated out, groggy. What was that noise? Probably the pipes, he murmured. Go back to sleep. He shuffled to the kitchen, poured water, then wandered back. The silence stretched. I waited, breath shallow, counting the beats of my heart. 1, 2, 3 before slipping out. In my car I turned the clock over and pried open the back. Inside were folded papers, creased and yellowed. Dad's handwritten note and the real will, signed, notarized, sealed. My hands shook as I read it. To my daughter Elena. The apartment and savings are yours alone. Marcus is to receive the car and tools. I trust you both will respect each other. They'd known all along. They'd hidden it. The betrayal sank into my bones like cold rain. They hadn't just taken my home, they'd buried my father's last words. I closed the clock, whispering, time reveals truth. By sunrise I'd already called my lawyer. Because now I wasn't just evicting them, I was exposing them. And the next envelope they received wouldn't be a notice. It would be the end of their story. The next morning, sunlight hit the brass clock like it was alive again. A single gleam slicing through the quiet of my lawyer's office. He set the will gently on the desk. This changes everything, Elena. He explained that the version on file, the one my brother had presented years ago, was forged. The notary stamp was fake, the date mismatched. My pulse steadied. So he knew all along? He nodded. Yes. And when he found out you never questioned it, he took advantage of that silence. Silence. That was the motif that had followed me for years. My silence at dinner when Mom favored him, my silence when he and his wife borrowed money, my silence when they moved into my home. Every time I stayed quiet, they built another wall with it. I wasn't quiet anymore. We filed the motion to reinstate the authentic will and evict them formally under fraud. Within days the news spread. My brother's colleagues, friends, even his in-laws, started whispering. That evening I stood in front of the building again, this time with the court order in my hand. My lawyer beside me. A police officer at the door. When my brother opened it, his face was drained of color. His wife hovered behind him, clutching a mug. My chipped blue mug. The officer spoke firmly. You're required to vacate immediately. The property belongs to Ms. Ward. He sputtered. She can't. But the officer's tone cut her off. Ma'am. This is a legal order. I didn't gloat. I didn't shout. I simply walked past them, each step echoing in the hallway like a clock's tick finally resuming. Inside, everything smelled wrong. Artificial candles, spoiled food, the sour scent of betrayal. I set the clock back on the mantel, wound the key and listened. Tick, tick, tick. For the first time in 5 years, time was moving again. But justice wasn't done yet. There was one last truth they hadn't faced, the one that would ruin more than their home. The court hearing was short, quiet, almost anticlimactic. My brother's lawyer spoke fast, but his words stumbled over the evidence I'd brought. The Real will, the forged signature, the transfer receipts, the voice messages. The judge's gavel hit once. The property and associated assets are hereby reinstated to Ms. Elena Ward. It was over. 5 years of silence, manipulation and guilt. Over with a single sentence. My brother avoided my eyes as they walked out. His wife's heels clicked like tiny gunshots on the marble floor. She turned once, lips curling. Hope you're happy, Elena. You've destroyed your own family. I wanted to answer. But I didn't. Because the truth was I hadn't destroyed it. They had, the moment they chose greed over love. Outside the courthouse, the air smelled like rain on metal. The brass clock motif I'd brought with me reflected the gray sky, its hands finally moving again. I could hear the faint tick in my palm, steady, alive. I didn't go back to the apartment immediately. Instead, I drove to the pier where Dad used to take us on Sundays. The sea was calm, gulls crying in lazy circles above the water. I held the clock up to my chest and whispered, "It's done, Dad. It's finally done." That night, I placed the clock on the mantel just where it had always belonged. The lavender scent was faint now, almost memory. I sat on the couch, legs tucked beneath me, and for the first time in years, silence didn't feel like punishment. Later, I opened my laptop to one last message from my brother. "We're leaving town. Don't bother finding us." I smiled, not out of revenge but release. Because I didn't need to find them. Time already had. The clock ticked once more, echoing through the room like forgiveness. I closed my eyes, letting it mark the end not of family but of fear. Peace felt heavier than anger, but finally it was mine.